Joined by Will Gaines of the Auburn Plainsman. So, Will, thanks for being on again. We really appreciate it. And just wow, I mean, we had you on 3 weeks ago, but now you're in the national title. So, just talk about the whirlwind from Alabama to Missouri. I guess it just start from there.
Oh, it's been crazy. You know, last time I talked with you, I think you asked me, did I think Auburn had a Sugar Bowl bid locked up? And
right. Yeah.
I didn't think so. But I mean, it's completely changed when you beat a number one Alabama. You know, things are going to change for the positive for you. And then, you know, that was the craziest game I've ever been a part of, ever seen, probably ever will see. Even though I said that against, you know, after the Georgia game, I didn't think I'd ever seen anything like that. And you know, last week against Missouri, you know, the way that game went with the offensive performance, Auburn, you know, finally getting back to the top of the SEC. And then the game ended and Ohio State loses. And so Auburn's back in the national championship, and it's just been really crazy considering what all happened last year with not winning a single conference game to winning the SEC and now going to the BCS national championship game.
Right. Well, just going back to that Alabama game, we've all seen it, you know, a bunch of times. But just talk about that, and you know, the game actually, you know, I think there was a point in the game where Alabama may have been up like 21-7, and just talk about some of the key turning points in that game, and you know, just the ending, obviously.
Well, one key turning point was when Alabama decided not to kick a field goal. I think it was with about 8 minutes to go in the game, and Alabama decided not to kick a field goal and go for it on 4th and 1, and Auburn stopped them. That just seemed like that changed because Auburn, at that point, Auburn looked beat. And, you know, that just kind of changed the momentum. Auburn was able to go down and tie the game, and then the ending was crazy. I remember, you know, I was standing on the end zone where that happened, and I remember looking back, and I didn't see him until the field goal fell short. And I said, you know, Alabama's not going to be ready for that. And when I saw him and he passed me, and I said, there's no way, you know, they're going to catch him. And I looked up at the scoreboard, and sure enough, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen.
I mean, that's got to be pretty unbelievable. People say, you know, you don't practice for that. That was just kind of a spur of the moment play, you know. I mean, you can't really blame their kicker. I mean, you asked him to kick it from what, like 60 yards, so it just kind of happened.
Yeah, it's a 57-yarder. It was long, and you know, a lot of people criticize Nick Saban for trying that long field goal, and you know, I think it was a good call. I mean, how many times do you lose a game when a team returns a missed field goal for a touchdown? I mean, that never happens. But you got to give a lot of credit to Gus Malzahn for putting Chris Davis back there, and not only that, but
please leave a message.
You watch that play unfold. There was about 4 or 5 blocks that were huge blocks that helped that play. It wasn't like, you know, Chris Davis just took off running down the sideline and nobody was even looking at him. You know, there was a lot of blocks that had to be made, and you know, just a great play by him.
Right, and well, you know, talk about last week. Obviously, Auburn won the SEC title versus Missouri. You know, I thought that Missouri's wide receivers would get Auburn's secondary some trouble with the way they kind of struggled versus Alabama with a 99-yard touchdown pass. But Auburn was just able to really just line up and run the ball. I mean, they didn't even throw it but maybe 10 or 12 times. So,
yeah, and Missouri Student Newspaper, and both times they asked me the question, can Nick Marshall throw the ball enough to beat him? He's going to have to throw the ball. And both times I said, you know, I don't think Auburn's going to try to throw the ball. You know, Auburn has got to this point in the season by running the football. And it didn't surprise me that they, you know, ran it so much against Alabama, and it didn't surprise me that they ran it so much against Missouri. That's what got them here. And, you know, even though, you know, a lot of people like to say, you know, they're a one-dimensional team, but that run game has got so many aspects to it. You know, they can run it, you know, right up the middle with Trey Mason. They can run the read option with Nick Marshall. They've got Corey Grant and Ricardo Lewis who can run the jet sweep. And when you add all those things together, I mean, it's a very dynamic offense, and it gives defenses, you know, a lot of trouble trying to defend that. So, you know, it didn't really surprise me that Auburn had success running the football against Alabama and Missouri, and I think they'll have success running the ball against Florida State in the national championship game.
well, you know, obviously talking about Trey Mason, vaulted himself up in the Heisman race with 304 yards last week, and that gets him over 1,600 yards for the year with 22 touchdowns. Talk about Trey Mason, the year he's had, because it really, you know, talking about Heisman saying he really kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah. When you talk about Trey Mason, yeah, I think you've got to take it back to last year. Trey Mason was the one bright spot on this team. A lot of people forget he rushed for 1,000 yards last year. I mean, he was, basically the offense. And, it was – and then he just continued that into this year. And I was telling somebody, I think if the Alabama game had been earlier in the season and he had a 165-yard performance against Alabama, he would have been in the Heisman talk a lot earlier. And, a lot of people were talking about it going into the Missouri game, around, in the state. But nobody nationally was really giving him a lot of credit. And he just went out there and put on a show. I agree with you, though. I kind of think he got into it a little bit late. I think the voters that are in the SEC will probably, put him up there pretty high. But I don't think he really has a chance to win it. But, who knows? Anything can happen. I was surprised last night when A.J. McCann won the Maxwell.
Yeah, we were talking with the Chandler Smith out there from Aggie Athletics. Asked him about winning the Maxwell over – Winston and somebody like, Johnny Manziel. That was surprising to me, too. I mean, he is a good quarterback, but it's more of like a lifetime achievement thing. I mean, if he's got such a cast around him, I don't see how I don't think he's the best quarterback over Jameis Winston, but obviously they thought he was. We'll talk a little bit about, obviously Auburn's going to play FSU now in the national title. I guess the hype around that, how do you think that'll unfold?
Well, Florida State, to me, I think, is probably the most complete team Auburn's played all year. They can run the ball, they can throw the ball on offense, they can stop the run on defense, and they can stop the pass on defense. Plus, you add in that they've got the best player in college football this year. That makes for a really, really tough test. But the thing I've learned about this Auburn team is you can't count them out. I mean, a lot of people said they didn't have a shot against Alabama, and a lot of people said they didn't have a shot against Missouri. But they just, they bought into this plan that Malzahn, has, and they're getting better and better every week. That's the thing Malzahn said once the SEC championship was over, was we're playing our best football right now. And I don't think there's, I think we're the only team, that can say that. They're continuing to get better, and Nick Marshall, I mean, you could talk about him. He's had an incredible season. And, I think this long layover, I think, will help Auburn get a little healthy and give Nick Marshall a chance to maybe get in there with offensive coordinator Rhett Lashley and learn a little bit more about this passing game, because a lot of people forget, he didn't go through spring practice. He wasn't here in the summer. He showed up when fall camp started. And, I mean, he's not even been on campus here at Auburn but about 4 or 5 months.
That's right, but he's had a great year, obviously, not throwing the ball that much, but just kind of, managing the game for him and letting Trey Mason run the ball like they did versus Missouri and things like that. But do you think Auburn will be able to run the ball versus FSU? I mean, I think that's one of the keys to the game. If they can rush for, I guess, 300 or 400 yards, I think they'll have a pretty good shot.
I think they can. I think they can. Trey Mason gets a lot of credit, and it's well-deserved. Trey Mason runs so hard. But that offensive line is the best offensive line in the country. And, a lot of people, forgot about that the past couple of years. But Auburn, when they lost so many on the offensive line after, the 2010 National Championship, that was Gene Chizik and Gus Malzahn. He was here, too. Their main focus was to rebuild the offensive line. And, I mean, they were just rolling in, 4- and 5-star offensive linemen, and now they're finally starting to develop into what they can be. So you have a guy like Reese Mute, who is a veteran leader there at center, and then you got a guy like Greg Robinson at left tackle, who more than likely will be a first-round draft pick this coming up spring in the NFL draft. Then you add in Jay Price, a great fullback who will probably play in the NFL. Then, the 3 running backs that Auburn has and Nick Marshall, it just makes for a deadly combination. And I don't think, nobody's been able to stop Auburn's run game, and I don't really see that happening. The big thing that concerns me, though, is Auburn had some turnover troubles against Missouri. And if Florida State wants to stop Auburn's offense, I think that's going to be the key is, can they force Nick Marshall to make some mistakes? Because he's made them this year.
With Malzahn winning, Home Depot Coach of the Year, not a surprise there. I guess just kind of recap the job he's done. 3-9 to 12-1, pretty unbelievable what he's done in a year.
It really is. I think this week was the 1-year anniversary of him being hired, and the second he stepped off the plane at the Auburn airport, it just seemed like things changed. The first thing he said when he got off the plane and the students were out there waiting for him was, "My goal is to get Auburn back to winning championships." And he said it again in his introductory press conference. And he's followed through with that. He's got a plan, and he's got a plan. But a lot of people don't know Gus Malzahn has been successful at everywhere he's been. He won a lot of state championships when he was a high school football coach. He comes to college football as Arkansas's offensive coordinator. They go to the SEC championship in his first year. He goes to Tulsa and wins conference championships, and then he comes to Auburn and wins the national championship. And last year at Arkansas State, they were a dominant team. So when you really think about it, the job Malzahn's done, it was a home run hire. And, when you take into account, that he recruited most of the players on the team, it's really not that surprising, that he had the success that he's having this year. And it's really been, a season to remember.
Right. It really has for Auburn. And, you going to be making the trip out there to Pasadena? Or, are a lot of Auburn people, I'm sure tickets are pretty expensive. It's going to be an expensive trip for some people, especially going a couple years ago.
Yeah, it's definitely an expensive trip. I'm actually going out there with the Plainsman crew. We're going to be covering the game. We get free credentials.
That's right. That's the good thing about being in the press. You do get credentials. So.
That is right. But other than that, we're pretty much I bought my plane ticket.
Right.
It was pretty expensive, but I think I may have to sleep outside the stadium for those 4 days we're there because it was pretty expensive to get out there. But yeah, we'll be covering the games. So everybody will have to make sure they check out theplainsman.com and follow us on Twitter for updates on the game.
Well, we definitely will check that. But they say that the Rose Bowl is like the Augusta National, I guess, of college football. Just the tradition, and so it'll be something I'm sure that's neat to see. If Auburn never goes back.
Yeah, it's exciting anytime, a team goes to a national championship. But for me, the fact that it's at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena just makes it that much better. You talk about the history that's happened in that stadium, all the great games. It really is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. And then you take into account, Auburn's playing Florida State. Last time Auburn played Oregon, and while that was a great matchup because of the two high-powered offenses, people in Auburn, Alabama don't really know a whole lot about Oregon football, but we're very familiar with Florida State football. In the 80s with
right.
Bobby Bowden and Pat Dye, they had a great rivalry going. And then Jameis Winston was actually talking about it on SportsCenter today. A lot of these guys on Florida State and Auburn's team,
know each
Florida
other.
State and Auburn was recruiting them back and forth. Florida State's been one of Auburn's biggest rivals on the recruiting trail the past couple of years. A lot of that has to do with Damian Craig was at Florida State the past few years. But, Jameis Winston, if it hadn't been for some secondary violations during his recruiting, he probably would have come to Auburn and stayed in state. And Trey Mason, he's from Florida. So, you got a lot of history between these guys, and I think, the Florida State-Auburn matchup, that's going to be, that's going to make it just that much sweeter.
Right, and I think there'll be a lot of FSU fans that go out there, and it sets up for a better game, FSU-Auburn, than it would have been Florida State-Ohio State. Just more excitement nationally, obviously, with the SEC trying to keep its 8th straight title. And I think that Alabama's game, Oklahoma and Alabama, that's one of the other traditional games. They actually fell into a pretty good Sugar Bowl. It'd be interesting what happens there, but thanks for coming on with us again. We appreciate it. So check out Will Gaines, sports editor at Auburn Plainsman. So have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and a safe trip out there to Pasadena. Be watching you. Good luck to your Tigers out there versus the Seminoles. And we'll definitely get you on next year. But thanks for coming on all year. We really appreciate it.
All right, thanks. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, that's Will Gaines from the Auburn Plainsman. He's been a great guest 3 times we've had him on the show, and we appreciate him coming on once again, and hope he has a safe trip out there to Pasadena when Auburn battles FSU in the national title this year. So we're going to take a quick little break.